Welcome back, everyone, to Season 9.
Season 9 already.
It's wild, right? Time flies when you're having fun diving deep into the world of Syriac early church fathers.
Those figures that had such a huge impact on Christian theology and biblical interpretation.
Yeah, how we think about the faith and understand the scriptures, and even how we actually practice it. I mean, the whole ascetic tradition.
How to live out that faith, yeah.
Exactly. And for this particular deep dive, we're focusing on, it's fascinating, John of Dalyatha.
John of Dalyatha, also known as John Saba, or Yohanan, if you want to get all fancy.
Okay, I'll stick with John of Dalyatha for now. But seriously, who was this guy? Why are his teachings so important, so influential?
And also, why did they cause such a stir,
That's what we're going to uncover today. His journey from this young monk all the way to this renowned mystic. What are the core ideas that he was putting out there? And then the whole story of his legacy and how that played out within the Church of the East. It's pretty fascinating. And before we jump in, I really want to acknowledge the person behind all this great research.
Yeah, this is some seriously in-depth work.
It is Andrei Mubarak, a teacher and tour guide from Jerusalem, actually.
Wow. Directly from the source, so to speak.
Right. And he's an Aramaic-speaking Christian living in Jerusalem, teaching about the Aramaic roots of our Christian faith. Seriously, check out his website, www.twinsbiblicalacademy.com. You can learn more about his work.
Definitely be checking that out. Sounds like a valuable resource.
Totally. Okay, so where do we even start with this guy, John of Dalyatha? There's so much to unpack. What stood out to you as we were going through all this material?
The first thing that really struck me, honestly, was the world he lived in. Born around 690. Imagine that. And in a Syriac-speaking region near present-day Mosul.
Oh, wow. So a lot of history there.
Right. And this was during the Umayyad Caliphate, which, believe me, wasn't some theological backwater. This is a period of intense intellectual and spiritual ferment.
So like a really vibrant time for ideas?
Absolutely. And he was immersed in the foundations of his faith. The Bible, the liturgy, those church fathers that came before him.
He was surrounded by it all.
And then on top of all that, he was super dedicated to these like hardcore ascetic practices.
Oh, so we're talking like serious fasting, intense prayer.
Exactly. Prolonged vigils. It was a crucial part of his development, I think. This early foundation really shaped his later mystical insights.
So it's like he's not just studying his faith, but really living it intensely from the very beginning. And then he enters this Coenobitic monastery, Mar Yozadek. 7 years in this communal setting, and then suddenly this sharp turn toward solitude. He becomes a hermit in the mountains of Beth Dalyatha.
The House of Vine Branches. Such a striking image, isn't it? You can almost feel the sense of contemplation that drew him there.
Totally. And it was in Beth Dalyatha, dedicating most of his life to solitude, that his unique mystical theology really took shape. But here's the thing, he doesn't just stay a solitary figure.
He returns to Beth Cardew later in life, right?
Yeah, and becomes, get this, the abbot of a monastic community.
Wow. So from hermit to leader.
I know, right? And he even creates a new rule, like a guide for novices just starting their monastic journey.
It's fascinating. It shows this balance between his deep personal mystical experiences and a real sense of responsibility to guide others.
Yeah, bringing that wisdom back to the community.
And he served as abbot until he died around 780.
Okay, so a fascinating arc, deep personal devotion, and then leadership. But let's talk about his writings. His main work, Chapters of Knowledge, or Ruus al-Marifa, this was written for ascetics and it really caught on. Why? What were the key themes that made it so influential?
Okay, well, first off, purification and repentance.
Right. Those are like the bedrock of a lot of spiritual traditions.
Totally. But John, he saw these not just as starting points, but as ongoing, absolutely essential for any real transformation.
It's a continual process.
Exactly. Why he placed such a strong emphasis on those ascetic practices. Fasting, prayer, and silence. Tools to cleanse the heart, get rid of distractions.
Make room for the divine.
Yes. That's a great way to put it. It's about creating that inner space for God.
Now, another key point. The sources highlight his whole concept of the spiritual journey as a struggle with demons.
That's one that might need a little unpacking for a modern audience.
Yeah, because when we hear demons, we might feel of something very literal, even scary.
Right. But for John, it wasn't always about external, literal demons, although that was definitely part of the worldview back then. But more broadly, it represents those internal battles we all face. Negative thoughts, temptations, anything holding us back from moving towards God.
So those inner obstacles.
Exactly. And this inner conflict requires vigilance
Perseverance.
and reliance on God's grace. Absolutely. It's essentially a metaphor for the intense inner work that's needed for spiritual growth.
And these early figures, they really embraced that, didn't they? That profound psychological and spiritual discipline.
It's pretty incredible when you think about it.
Okay, now two themes that are really fascinating to me. Tears and wonder. Tears being a sign of genuine repentance that has echoes in many spiritual traditions.
Sure.
But the centrality of wonder, temha, feels particularly significant. He's not talking about passive reception. It's more like an active cultivation of awe.
Right. Right.
So based on what we know, how might this sense of wonder have manifested in his everyday life?
Well, while we don't have specific daily accounts, the sheer emphasis he puts on it suggests a deep awareness of God's presence in creation. And he spends so much time in solitude, contemplating nature. I mean, the beauty, the complexity of the natural world would have been constant reminders of divine power and love, fostering that sense of awe and reverence.
Yeah, so it's like training yourself to see the sacred in the everyday. And that ties directly into another key theme, the symbolism of nature, especially his use of fire to illustrate divine power. What would those specific symbols have meant to the people of his time?
Oh, symbols drawn from the natural world, like fire, those would have been instantly recognizable and powerful for people back then. Fire represents so many things: purification, transformation, intense energy, even the passionate love of God.
So much packed into one symbol.
Right. And in a society so much more connected to the elements than we are today, those natural symbols carried even more weight. John used them to bridge the gap between tangible realities and spiritual truths.
It's like speaking a language they understood.
Precisely. He even uses the image of a blacksmith's fire purifying metal in some of his writings,
Oh, I like that.
to illustrate how God's grace refines the human soul through trials and asceticism. Those concrete images would have been very powerful back then.
Okay, so moving on to his ultimate goal, union through contemplation. The sources describe this as a dynamic process that unfolds through stages: serenity, purity, and finally, perfection.
You can definitely see that perfectionist streak we mentioned coming through here.
Yeah. So what did he actually mean by mystical union?
Well, he didn't see it as some static endpoint. It was this ongoing journey of transformation. Those specific stages, serenity, purity, perfection, they suggest a deepening relationship with God. It's not about achieving some flawless state.
More like a continuous striving.
Yes, a constant effort to purify the heart and mind through dedicated contemplative prayer, leading to closer union with the divine.
And that leads us to the internal liturgy of the heart. Prayer as an internal offering, a sacrifice on the heart's altar. It's like shifting the focus away from external rituals.
It is. It's like the difference between, say, a grand formal ceremony and a quiet personal prayer you carry with you throughout your day.
Okay, yeah, I got that.
So while the established rituals of the church were still important, John emphasized inner, heartfelt prayer. The human heart itself, he saw that as the true altar, a sacred space for offering love, devotion, and longing to God.
And this internal liturgy, it leads to a deeper communion with the divine.
Precisely. One that goes beyond outward expressions of faith.
Now, the last key concept, the vision of God, he was deeply influenced by that verse from Matthew 5:8. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God.
Right.
So John taught that purity of heart enables this mystical vision of God in their heart. So what kind of seeing are we talking about here?
This isn't about a literal physical encounter.
Okay, so not like suddenly you're face to face with God.
No, not at all. It's more like a profound shift in inner perception, a deep, intuitive knowing of God's presence, born from a purified heart.
So it's a mystical insight, a direct personal encounter made possible through all that ascetic practice and contemplative prayer.
Exactly. It's a seeing with what some call the inner eye, a heightened spiritual awareness and understanding.
It sounds like a really demanding but also potentially transformative path. But then things take a turn. Condemnation and eventually rehabilitation. In 786, or maybe 787, Patriarch Timothy I officially bans his works,
Accusations of Messianism and Sabellianism.
which the source points out were likely unfounded.
Right, right.
So what might have led to these accusations, and what were the immediate consequences?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Even deeply held spiritual ideas can be interpreted in vastly different ways depending on the theological climate of the time.
Yeah, context is everything.
Exactly. So Missalianism, that basically argued that salvation was achieved solely through prayer, downplaying sacraments and church structures.
Okay, so potentially a threat to authority.
Right. And Sabellianism, that's a heresy concerning the Trinity. Kind of blurs the distinction between the persons of the Godhead.
Okay, so maybe they saw John's focus on personal mystical experience and direct union with God as somehow diminishing the importance of established practices.
Right, and maybe even leading to unorthodox views on the Trinity.
And Patriarch Timothy I, he was known for being a stickler for doctrine.
Absolutely. So John's emphasis on direct experience might have seemed like a challenge to the established order.
So boom, his writings are banned. No more official reading or distribution.
Which makes it even more remarkable that his ideas survived.
Right.
They're preserved in Syriac Orthodox manuscripts,
Yeah.
often anonymously or attributed to other authors.
It's amazing how his work found a way to persist despite that official censure.
That's the power of ideas.
Totally. And then decades later, there's a reversal. Patriarch Ishobar-Nun rehabilitates him, along with others who had been condemned, sometime between 823 and 828.
Wow.
This suggests either a shift in theological perspectives or maybe just a reevaluation of those earlier judgments. What does this tell us about the broader landscape of early Christian thought?
I think it shows how dynamic, how evolving theological discourse was within Christianity. Ideas that were once considered unorthodox or even heretical could be re-examined later on, maybe even embraced.
It wasn't always a single fixed understanding.
Right. Different interpretations, different theological emphasis could emerge, be challenged, and either gain acceptance or fade away.
And it highlights the importance of historical context, too.
Absolutely. We need to understand the circumstances in which these ideas were developed and debated.
Okay, now, despite that initial condemnation, his works achieve widespread circulation, translated into Arabic, Ethiopic, Greek, Latin, and even falsely attributed to other respected figures. That's kind of crazy.
It is.
But it shows you the power of his ideas. Even detached from his name, they resonated.
The fact that they were translated into so many languages shows a real hunger for his teachings. And the misattribution, wow. Isaac of Nineveh, Dorotheus of Gaza, those are big names, very influential.
Yeah, and associating John's work with them probably helped it gain wider acceptance, especially during the Middle Ages.
Absolutely, and it tells you something about the content itself. It must have resonated deeply with people, even if they didn't know who originally wrote it.
And his works find a permanent home outside the Church of the East, within the Syriac Orthodox tradition, where he was actually venerated.
That's quite a journey.
And the fact that his writings were circulated anonymously, with those general titles like spiritual elder or divine elder, it's like his wisdom transcended his individual identity.
Right, it almost erases the controversy.
Exactly. So what stands out to you about this whole journey of his writings?
What really strikes me is the resilience of his vision, the profound appeal of his mysticism. Despite the ban, the anonymity, his teachings on asceticism, purity of heart, and union with God, they really resonated with ascetics and mystics across many different traditions.
It's like there's a universal appeal to those ideas.
There is. And it's not just a coincidence that his thought aligns with other influential figures like Evagrius and Pseudo-Dionysius,
who were also big in Eastern and Western mysticism.
Right. It speaks to this shared human desire for deeper spiritual understanding, one that goes beyond specific denominations. And John of Dalyatha, he contributed significantly to the development of mystical theology, far beyond the original context of Syriac Christianity.
It's incredible when you think about the reach of his influence. So, as you can see, John of Dalyatha, this is a truly fascinating figure, a man dedicated to asceticism, mystical contemplation, and his impact, it's still felt today. His journey from solitary monk to influential writer, it gives us such a great insight into the world of the early Syriac church.
Yeah, it's a window into a rich and vibrant period of Christian history.
And the survival of his works, despite all those obstacles, it really shows you the enduring power of ideas.
Ideas that continue to speak to those who are looking for a deeper connection with the divine.
And it makes you wonder, right? How many other hidden figures, forgotten voices, have also shaped Christian thought throughout history? And again, huge thanks to Andrei Mobarak, the researcher who brought all this to light. He's a teacher, a tour guide from Jerusalem, and he's dedicated to sharing the Aramaic roots of the Christian faith.
His website is a treasure trove of information, www.twinsbiblicalacademy.com.
So check it out if you want to learn more. And here's something to think about as we wrap up. Given the initial condemnation and eventual rehabilitation of John of Dalyatha, What does that tell us about how theological ideas are received, challenged, and ultimately integrated, or maybe even rejected over time? It's a question that has no easy answers, but one that's definitely worth pondering.
Definitely food for thought.
Absolutely. And with that, we'll see you next time for another deep dive.
See you then.
Bye.